up? Yeah, so
This is about Follies, I take it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just gonna play a video, and then we're gonna announce the date, and we're gonna announce the Vine video competition.
Okay, cool.
And for people to look out for it.
Is there anything I actually need to do? Or I just
do
literally...
you want to announce any of them?
I don't really know any of the details, per se.
Okay. I don't know if the music or the sound is on. I mean, just say like.
How long is the...
It's 1.5 minutes.
That's not going to give us much time to...
No. Do you know if the sound is working? Okay, thanks. No. But maybe you can just say like...
It's going to be fun? I don't know.
That's only...
Okay, now in the movie,
No.
I'll
If you only if you didn't get the first packet. What are you missing? You got the first packet? You don't need it.
You can say, it's going to be really fun. Everybody gets drunk. It's a huge party.
Okay, I'll say it's a lot of fun. It's a huge party. Everyone should come out. I'm not going to say in front of like 500 people like, let's all get drunk.
Say we feel comfortable with that.
And there is literally a party afterwards, right?
Yeah, so we're going to have like, at a bar nearby, we'll have drinks sessions.
So about 10:29 to get their attention, whack on that several times. You've got to get some noise, otherwise they won't register.
Okay.
Otherwise they'll keep talking while you do it.
Maybe I can just start talking now.
No, they'll just talk over you. You need some noise other than talking to get their attention. So I'm looking for something heavy you can whack.
I need a gavel.
I used to have a gong, but it used to shock people out of their existence because if you put it near the mic and you hit the gong, it just... Like that. You need something like that. Hi. Hi, Wayne. There you go. Okay, now it's overkill, right? You're watching the same thing again. No, don't take that if you have the first packet.
No, someone else wanted. I have my...
You have the first packet already?
No, someone else wanted the...
Do they have the first lecture note packet? This is just... Oh, they don't have it then. It's okay. This is only if you don't have the first lecture note packet. Okay, so don't take this. If you have the first lecture note packet, you don't need this. Okay, nothing to pick up unless you have... Do you have the first packet?
Is that the syllabus or is that
No, the actual lecture note packet.
No, I don't.
Then you can take it. You don't have the first packet either? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Don't
true.
take that unless you actually don't have the packet, okay?
I just don't want to do all that for people like coming up.
Okay, don't take this unless you actually don't have the first packet. This is not just a regular... if you have the first lecture note packet? The packet, the lecture note packet. That's fine, that's all you need. Okay, then take it. Just keep the electronic one. I didn't make enough copies for everybody, so we have the electronic
It's the same
one.
packet as we gave out on the other day.
Okay, on to you. Okay, folks, please get settled in.
This is the same as you gave on Monday, right? This packet?
No, this is actually the full lecture note packet
Oh.
that you have to get in the bookstore or download. That's don't take that many copies, okay? But they have the first lecture note packet. This is not a copy for everybody. If you have the first lecture note packet that you downloaded already, don't take it. Don't take it because I don't have enough copies for everybody. Okay, this is.
All right, so I'm just going to start it.
Okay.
I hope that it.
I'm going to reclaim these. No, there's nothing left. There's nothing left. This is blue pages. No packets left.
I've been a fan of his since he posted his first lecture, and I'll be a fan of his until he posted his last lecture.
He's just one professor sending out thousands of emails, doing it all on his own.
The first time we met, he almost passed me by.
He's such an inspiration. He's from like a small town. He gives us hope.
I'd like you to be all born-again finance people, so I'm going to try to sell you on this really hard. I might not succeed.
He's living an extraordinary life, but it's just like you or me.
So I'd like to be the Lady Gaga of finance. I don't know whether you plan to have fun or not, but I'm going to have fun.
So for those MBA ones that haven't heard of it and aren't in Block 4, that was a little preview of what's to come at Follies on April 24th. It's a Friday night, Friday evening. It's going to be a really good time.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Big party afterwards. Everybody should come.
And I also want you guys to watch out on Facebook, on your respective Facebook pages. We're going to make an announcement about how you can make videos for Follies. You can either do a video about 5 minutes long, or we're going to have a contest for Vine-like videos, which are going to be 6 seconds long, and you have the opportunity to win a cash prize. So if you have any questions about it, come see one of us, and thanks for listening.
I've had to do some pretty embarrassing things for Follies. That was actually not too bad because I really wasn't even involved in it. They just made it and said, I still haven't lived it down with my kids, But the most embarrassing one was when they made me wear an afro wig. I'm not kidding. This is about 8 years ago. There used to be a bar called Polyesters down the street. And have you ever seen Saturday Night Live and the John Travolta walked down the street? I had to do that walk down 4th Street from here to Polyesters. Luckily, this is New York City. People just let you do whatever you want to do. I'd have been arrested pretty much anywhere else in the country, but it's a lot of fun. I've never made it to Follies because it's after 4:30, and I have this thing about not hanging around my office when the sun goes down. I don't know what, it's a werewolf, vampire, some fear I have of actually being here. But I've heard it's a lot of fun, so I'm sure I will hear about any part of me that shows up there. Last session, I got to the very last couple of pages of the syllabus. You don't have to pull it up, okay? But there are a couple of very important things that I really did not get to. One is I showed you that grading pie chart, which is about 25 to 30% A's, about 55 to 60% B's. We all kind of work within that guideline in corporate finance. And that, so essentially the question is, how do you end up with that grade? And here are the things that are going to go into your grade. There's going to be a project that I'm going to talk about that essentially is going to start running as of 2 days ago. It's already in motion, even though you don't know it. That's going to go through the entire semester. That's worth 30%. There's a case that I will concoct. So it's not a Harvard case. I haven't written it yet. I don't even know what it's going to be about. So about 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks into the class, I'll give you the case. It's a 2-week. That's a much shorter window. Okay? Those are both group projects. And you should know a lot of people in this class, so you should be able to form groups. And if you're not able to find a group, make sure you get your name on that orphan list. There are already 20 people on the orphan list, so you can all... I think there are enough people that actually create 3 groups or 4 groups. So I think everybody's going to be okay. But now comes the part that might give you some angst, especially if you're not a finance major. There will be 3 quizzes and a final exam. The first quiz is, I think, scheduled for March 9th. It's just before your break. There's really no way to dance around this break. The semester starts so late that the break is around the 10th or the 11th session. So it's session 9. The second quiz, I think, is April 6th. The third quiz is April 29th. Each quiz is 30 minutes long. And it'll be in the first 30 minutes of that class. And there will be class afterwards. Okay? Now, if you look around you, can you imagine each of you with a quiz in this room? It is catastrophic when it happens. So what I've done is I've reserved 2 other rooms. So what will happen is about half the people in this room will leave. And it'll be based on, I'll tell you who goes to which room. So you'll have more room to kind of spread things out, because otherwise it's almost impossible to have 350 people taking a quiz in this room. But it's a 30-minute quiz. It's open book, open notes. You can bring as many books as you want. You can check as many notes as you want. You can even go to the library in the middle if you really want to. But it's only 30 minutes. You don't have much time to do that. Okay? Every quiz and exam I've given, and I mentioned this last session, I've ever given in this class is online. So you can see every quiz 1 I've given for the last 15 years, every quiz 2, every quiz 3. If you go back pre-15 years, you'll see midterms, because I used to give 1 example. But you'll have lots of practice you can put in. And because it's open book, open notes, it does create a little bit of a problem for me, because it does mean that the quiz you see can't be any of the quizzes I've given before. So every semester I face this question of, this is where you feel sympathetic for me, is I have to find a twist that I can throw into the quiz that you haven't seen before. So that's going to be my challenge for the next 4 weeks. Don't worry, I haven't run out of twists yet, but that's going to be my signal that it's time to stop teaching, when I can't throw a twist in there. But 3 quizzes are 10% each, which then raises the interesting question of what happens if I cannot make that quiz. So if you get a chance, look at the very last page of your syllabus when you get back, when you leave the class. It lists out what I call the quiz rules. So there are 10 rules there, and I'll list out some of the rules. One is quizzes are individual work. So don't give me any cultural reasons for why you like to work in groups. That's all great, but once you're in there for this quiz, it is individual work. It's open book, open notes. I'm going to make it open iPad, because for some of you, your notes are electronic, so it's going to be on an iPad. No laptops yet. Maybe one of these days I'll change. No, but no laptops. So everything's okay in front of you. Okay? If you do have to miss a quiz, you have to let me know before the quiz. Okay? The reason I have to do that is otherwise you can take the quiz, do badly, slip the quiz in, and say, I missed it. So there's no optionality here. So you got to let me know before the quiz you're not coming. And you got to do it for good reason. I've actually listed out good reasons on that page, so go take a look at them. You're sick, your spouse is sick, your kid is sick, the subway train got stalled. Right? I'll check the MTA schedule, make sure there is a stall. But make sure it's a good reason. Bad reasons are I wasn't prepared, I feel overwhelmed, all those things are nice, but those are not good reasons for missing a quiz. If you do miss a quiz, here's what's going to happen. I will take the 10% on that quiz and move it into the remaining quizzes and the final exam. See why I have to move it forward? Because if I let you move it back, there's going to be strategic quiz missing, which is if you do really well in the first 2 quizzes, you actually get a benefit from missing the 3rd quiz. So if you miss the 3rd quiz, that 10% goes in the final. Your final will be worth 40%. If you miss the second quiz, I'll take that 10% and spread it out across your third quiz and your final. So it's always going to go forward. So you really don't lose by missing a quiz, but I will add a sweetener for those people who do take all 3 quizzes. If you take all 3 quizzes and you do badly on one quiz, in fact, if you do worse on one quiz than the other 2 and the final, I would replace the score on your worst quiz with the average score you got on your remaining exams. So let me give you an example. This is the most extreme scenario. You get a 10, a 10, a 0. Don't ask me, with third quiz, something happened. And then you get a 30. So you got 10, 10, 0, 30. Your worst quiz was obviously 0. On all the remaining exams, you got 100%. I would replace the score on your worst quiz with a 10. So if you have an outlier quiz, I'll compensate. So that's what you gain if you don't miss a quiz. Okay? The reason I say that is I'm not going to check doctor's certificates. If you tell me you're sick, I'm going to believe you. I mean, we're grown-ups here. So you might be inclined on the day of the first quiz, I really don't feel like taking this quiz. Think about what the cost is in terms of that worst quiz being thrown out, because that might tilt you towards taking the quiz. So if you can, try to take all 3 quizzes. Obviously, if something happens and you can't take a quiz, it's not the end of the world. It just means that you've lost that little option of the worst quiz being marked up. The final exam, I think, is scheduled for the Friday of the week we end. Friday, I think it's the 15th of May. It's from 10 to 12. Okay? So I'll keep reminding you of that so that you don't get the times mixed up. I've had people walk in at 10:30 for the final saying, the class always was at 10:30. The exam is from 10 to 12. And that's worth 30%. Okay? So all those things go into your final grade. Now let me talk a little bit about the project, which is going to run through the class. As I said, this project is already in motion, and some of you might already have gotten started. This is a group project. And the first thing for you to do is to find a group. I will not find a group for you. I will not assign you to a group. And I will not police your group. What I mean by that is if you have every group, there's a person who lags behind, I'm being kind, who really doesn't throw in their weight. Please don't come to me and ask me to deal with that person. Find creative ways of getting that person's attention. Maybe bloody ways. Watch The Godfather, you might get some ideas. Okay? Get them to do what... there's no way logistically I can be the group policeman for 80-something groups, which is what we're going to end up with in this class. Okay? The groups, I will accept groups as small as 4 and as large as 8. Okay? When you have a group of 8, remember that's a lot of logistical work on your part. To get a group together becomes a nightmare. So factor that into how big a group, but I'm going to allow a fair amount of leeway. Once you pick the group, here's the second step. I want you to pick, each person picks a company. So let me be very specific. You have a group of 4, you'll have 4 companies. A group of 8, you'll have 8 companies. Every person picks a company. The companies will be bound by a theme. And I'm very loose about it. It can be entertainment, in which case you can have Disney, you can have Netflix, you can even throw Apple in there. So I think it's an entertainment company. So I remember one semester a group picked Vice as their theme, so they had a tobacco company, gambling. So, I mean, I am willing to live with whatever you find appealing for your group. Okay? So negotiate among yourselves, but here's my only piece of advice. When you pick companies within your group, try to make them diverse. Have small companies and big companies, US companies, emerging market companies, European companies. The reason is very simple. This project is not about grinding numbers. I'll give you spreadsheets that grind out the numbers for you. It's about reading the numbers. And if you have 5 companies that look exactly alike and do exactly the same thing, it's not going to be that interesting. So it's nice, for instance, if you're doing the automobile business, to have Tesla, to have Tata Motors, maybe avoid Tata Motors because we'll be doing it in class. No. But an emerging market automobile company, a Japanese automobile company, Ford or a GM, and an auto parts company thrown into the mix if you want. Because the more diverse the companies, the more interesting the discussion becomes. Okay. So go with and you're from different parts of the world, different backgrounds. Use that to pick your company, because I'm going to give you leeway on the theme. It doesn't have to be so tightly defined that once you pick the theme, you're stuck with 8 companies or 10 companies. Okay? Here are the companies to avoid. No banks, no insurance companies. No trouble companies. I'm repeating myself, but it's the same thing, right? And here's why. It's not banks and insurance companies, it's not because they're difficult to analyze, they're extraordinarily boring. Because they're really opaque. You don't know what they're doing. You're stuck with regulatory constraints. So it's not that much fun to analyze a bank or an insurance company. If you're really interested in analyzing a bank or an insurance company from a corporate finance perspective, I'll give you the framework because I'll do Deutsche Bank in class. You can see how it's done, but try not to make that your company. Avoid money-losing companies for a very simple reason. Your project will be very, very easy to do. Here's why. If I ask you, there are 3 questions you're going to be addressing. Is my company taking good investments? How much should it borrow? How much should it pay out in dividends? Let's take a big money-losing company and ask these questions. Is your company taking good investments? Well, if it is, why is it losing money? Bang, gone. How much can it borrow? Money-losing company, what the heck are you doing thinking about borrowing money? No debt. How much should you pay in dividends? What dividends? Your project is done. So if you pick J.C. Penney, your project is already over. The company is a disaster. It should borrow no money. It should return all the cash to stockholders. Project done, go home. So that's the reason I want you to avoid money-losing companies. So as you pick that company, you might want to test to see whether and it doesn't have to be big money. Even if it's making a little money, you're okay. It's tipped the scales. So factor that in. Try to avoid companies with big capital arms, so don't do GE. Because GE Capital is going to create messes for you. Again, I will give you the framework for what to do if you face these companies, because what if I run into a company like this in the future? The problem with these companies, you have a bank embedded in the company, and it's going to throw everything off. All your numbers will have to be. So if you really, really want to do GE, come and talk to me. I'm okay with it as long as you know what you're getting into. So if you really want to do that, avoid real estate investment trusts and master limited partnerships. You know why? Again, it's boring because you're regulated to do what you need to do. What are REITs required to do in terms of dividends? They're required to pay 95% of their earnings in dividends. So I ask you, how much should you pay in dividends? It's actually out of your hands. REITs are actually required to stay in real estate. You can't say, well, I'm going to diversify into technology. You don't have that choice. And REITs are not taxed, which makes them a fairly unique entity in terms of how you borrow. So REITs and master limited partnerships, again, are really not. They're interesting from a valuation perspective, maybe as an investor, but from a corporate finance perspective, there are not that many layers of decisions you can make for the company. So within that framework, I'm giving you lots of leeway. Please don't come and tell me I can't find a company. I have a list of 41,000 public companies I'm willing to give you, and you can scan the list. I promise you, there's a company out there that's just right for you. But having said that, don't keep looking for the company. This isn't matchmaker.com. In other words, if you wait for the perfect company to come along, in the 9th week you're still saying, well, I didn't find the company yet. Pick a company, start moving. You can change your company. You're not going to be locked in. And here's the nice thing about starting the move right now, is what you do for that wrong company you pick, you can repeat for the right company. It's not going to take you very much time. It's the process that you have to get started on. So this week, for instance, I'm going to start assessing Disney's corporate governance. Who's on the board of directors? It's nice if you have an actual company in front of you where you can look at your company's board of directors and ask the same question that I'm going to ask of Disney. In fact, here's what I'm going to be trying to get you to do. Remember those 6 companies I ended the last class with that I said we're going to run through this entire class? Disney, Vale, Tata Motors, Baidu, Deutsche Bank, and Bookscape. What I'm going to do is take those 6 companies through the corporate finance process in this class, and you're going to be taking your company in parallel through the class with me. So in a sense, you're going to be applying it, and at the end of the last session, by the 15th week, you should have a full-fledged corporate financial analysis of the company you pick. That's why I want you to pick a company you're interested in, not a company you think will be easy. Leave the easy part to me. I think every company can be analyzed as long as you avoid those big money-losing financial service, real estate investment trust types of companies. Every company is interesting on some dimension. Okay? Might be boring on another one, but So if you look at the rest of the project, it's essentially the whole class. So we're going to start off by looking at the corporate governance of the company. And in each one, you'll actually see a webcast for just that section on the mechanics of how to do this. Okay? You'll also see whether that part is quantitative or qualitative, so that when you're doing that section, say, we don't have any numbers for this part. Maybe we're missing it. Look at that. Maybe this section is not that number-driven. And some data sets that you might be able to use for each section. So if you scan through, and I'm not going to go through the remaining 11 pages, it's each section of the class with what you'll be doing on your company. But I will be taking the 6 companies I've picked through all of those steps as well, so that you can see it happen, try it out. Okay? Here's one thing I can guarantee you. You're working with real companies in real time, right? So bad things can happen to your company. So you might have picked American Apparel 2 semesters ago, and your CEO's just been fired for sexual harassment. Your stock price has collapsed by 50%. You can't raise money. You're going to come to me and say, do I need to change my company? And my response is, this is life. Do your corporate financial analysis as what the company needs to do now. So don't view these unexpected events as problems. View them as opportunities, because in a sense it's going to give you a chance to re-examine basic things that the company is doing. So if you see a CEO fired for sexual harassment, you know what it tells you about the corporate governance of this company? Well, if this board had been doing its job right in the first place, you wouldn't have got to this place. So everything that you see happen out there is ammunition that you can use in your analysis. Any questions on the project? So you can scan through the rest, but for the moment it's not going to make much sense, because it's all the rest of the class coming. But you're going to be analyzing your company in every possible dimension. So let me start. How many of you do not have lecture note packet 1? I've been told that the bookstore has run out of packets. Who doesn't have packets yet? Okay. I will contact the bookstore and make sure that the packets get made soon. Let me take back the made sure, because I actually have no control over this process. I can scream, I can yell, I can go to the dean, I can go to the John Sexton. It won't make a difference. They work at their own pace. But for the next couple of sessions at least, for this session, for instance, I made 50 copies of the first 22 pages, which is roughly where we'll end up, so that if you don't have it, I'll make, if nothing's happening by Monday, I'll make 50 copies of the next 20 pages and bring it. Obviously, I don't want to do it for the rest of the semester, because it's a huge waste of paper, and you can see the logistical nightmare of getting physical stuff out in this class. So I'd like this to be done at a point in time where I can say, no more, you will not get any more papers from me. You'll get PDF files, you'll get attachments to emails, because this is, as you can see, a tough place to spread things out or return things in person. Okay. So let's start with Corporate Finance 101. Okay. As I said in Monday's class, this session is going to start laying the foundations for that objective in corporate finance. Because here's the basic point. If you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter how you get there. If you don't have an objective, then there is really no point to even talking about what to do next. So let me start off with that big picture. I promised you that you'd see this big picture 25, 30, 35 times during this class. Well, here's the first time you see it. So what we're going to be focusing on is the objective you see on top. If you don't have the notes, don't worry. Just stare at the slides. When you get the notes, you can just superimpose your notes on them. Okay? So the objective in corporate finance, I said, is maximize the value of your business. In fact, if you've taken a corporate finance class, you've probably seen variants of this objective. Like what? I've actually seen books where the objective is stated as maximizing stock prices, maximizing stockholder wealth. But I said it's maximize the value of the business. So here's the first thing I want to talk about. I want to use that financial balance sheet I showed you in Monday's session as a vehicle to talk about what the difference is between maximizing the value of the business, maximizing stockholder wealth, and maximizing stock prices. They're not interchangeable. So remember the financial balance sheet. You have assets in place and growth assets. You've got debt and equity. So the ultimate objective in corporate finance is I want you to maximize the left-hand side of that equation, maximize the value of your business. But here's the problem. Who makes decisions in a publicly traded company? It's managers, right? Who do managers answer to? Shareholders. So if you keep shareholders happy, then you're going to keep your job. So in practice, here's what tends to happen. Managers might agree in the abstract that their objective is to maximize the value of the business, but in practice they say, well, I don't care about the lenders, they can take care of themselves. If I can keep stockholders happy, then I'm going to keep my job. So in practice, this gets narrowed to maximizing stockholder wealth. So maximizing value of the business is a much broader objective than maximizing stockholder wealth. So let's say you've narrowed the objective. You say, my job as a manager is to maximize stockholder wealth. If I increase the wealth, they're going to be happy. If I decrease the wealth, they're going to be unhappy. Now you run into a practical question. How do you measure that wealth? You could ask a McKinsey or a BCG to come in and value your company for you every year, right? Or the value of the stockholders, come up with the stockholder wealth every year. But you know that process is both biased and subjective. So it would be nice if you would have a third-party estimate of what the value of your stockholders' wealth is. You see where I'm going next? If you're a public company, that's what the market price is. You can agree with the market. You can say anything you want about the market, but it's a convenient thing to have because now you have an estimate from the market. This is what I think your stockholders' wealth is worth. So in practice, what happens is maximizing value of the business becomes narrowed to maximizing stockholder wealth. And maximizing stockholder wealth gets narrowed even further to maximizing stock prices. So when people say the objective in corporate finance is to maximize stock prices, and they jump on corporate finance for that, they're missing the point. That's really not the objective. It's become the objective in practice because it's convenient. So one of the things we're going to talk about is the price we pay because we've narrowed the objective to maximizing stock prices, and then what we do about it next. Now, before I go down that road, there are a couple of critiques I hear of corporate finance, and some of them you learn in the other classes. I want to kind of bring to the surface, deal with them. I'm in a sense going to immunize you against this criticism because you'll hear this about corporate finance. Here's the first one. Basically, that if you maximize stock prices, you really don't care about your employees. You know what sets this conflict in motion? You see news stories. HP lays off 30,000 employees. And in that news story, it says HP stock price jumped 3.5% on the announcement. So in your mind, you're connecting the news stories. Companies that lay off employees see their stock prices go up. And then you flip to the other side. If you go out and hire employees, your stock price must go down. So this must be a conflict between what's good for stockholders and what's good for employees. Is it sometimes a conflict? Absolutely. But here's a very simple test of whether you as an employee care about stock prices. I could give you the list of 10 companies that have done the best over the last decade. You're going to have companies like Google and Apple on that list, and maybe Facebook. And I could give you the 10 companies that have done the worst in terms of stock prices over the last decade. And ask you, which group would you rather work for? I mean, when we talk about this conflict, we miss the point that most of the time, when stock prices go up, it's because you are a healthy company making a lot of money. And if you're a healthy company making a lot of money, you can afford to do stuff for your employees that a company that's not healthy can't try to do. I was in Google's New York office the other day. It's a neat place. All kinds of neat stuff all over the place. Free. Free this, free that. You know. It's not as good as the Google campus in California where you have bikes at the stationary. But you know why Google can afford to do this? It's because they make a lot of money. If J.C. Penney said, we're going to put exercise bike, you'd freak out. If you're doing well, you get degrees of freedom that a company that's not doing well will never get. So before you start complaining about how terrible it is that we care about stock prices, think about the consequences. Most companies, and if you don't believe me, take a list of the 25 companies that have done well in terms of stock price and the 25 companies that have done the worst. Look at the two lists and ask, which of these two lists of companies would I rather be working for? So most of the time, I'm not saying it's all of the time. Obviously, there will be times when the two interests clash. And if the only way to keep a company going is to make it smaller and you have to lay off employees, it is true that there you will get a conflict between what's good for the employees, at least in the short term, and what's good for the rest of the company, the stockholders in the company. The second critique I hear is that you care about stock price, it must mean you don't care about your customers. About 20 years ago, I was invited to give a talk to the top management at the Gap. This was when the Gap could actually afford to pay money to people to come in and talk to them. They can no longer afford to do that. Everything's at a 70% discount now. Right? So this was when they were rising as this growth company. So they had people from different functional areas come in and talk to their top management about what the Gap should do. And I had the singular misfortune of going right after the marketing guru. And the marketing guru got up and said, the objective for the Gap is to maximize customer satisfaction. And she walked off. And I got up and said, this is the stupidest objective I've ever heard. And here's why. How many of you shop at the Gap? See, there's the problem. Like 10 hands went up. Now think about your collective shopping experience. You walk in, it's a nice, well-lit store. Your happiness rises, your satisfaction is going up. You walk to the khaki section, they have your size. You're even happier. You pick it up and you start walking out, and there's a little crimp on your satisfaction, right? Which is, you got to stop and pay. That's so unpleasant. It's so dissatisfying. So if I said my objective is to maximize your satisfaction, you know what I should do? Take the cash registers out. Think of how satisfied your customers will be just before you go bankrupt. It is an absurd objective for a business. Do I want satisfied customers? Absolutely. Why? For a purely mercenary reason. I want you to keep coming back and buying stuff from me. Again, take a look at the 25 companies that have done well in terms of stock price and the 25 companies that have done the worst, and ask yourself, which of these two groups of companies had more satisfied customers? And most of the time, if your stock price is going up, it's because you delivered a product or service that people like, and you have satisfied customers. So don't make this a choice between, do I want to keep my customers happy, or do I want to be a company that makes my stockholders happy? And the third critique is actually, I think, the most damaging one. That if you go out and maximize stock prices, you must be some kind of social outlaw. That you are willing to create these huge costs for society. And again, we can use anecdotal evidence. Look at this company, look at this one, look at this one. But if you step back again and think about this, it is a false choice. The kinds of companies can afford to be socially conscious, that can afford to give away stuff, are the companies that are doing well. Remember when Microsoft gave free PCs to every library in the country? Of course, this was when Microsoft was making tons of money. And they had, I'm sure, a hidden agenda as to why they wanted a PC in every library. But they were able to do it because they were making billions of dollars. Compaq could not have done that at that time. In fact, my son brought home this point when he's now 25. This was when he was like 9 or 10, and he was going through First Communion. And I'm not Catholic, but my wife is, and I didn't realize how lucrative this exercise could be. Right? So at First Communion, we have a party, and people hand him gifts, and some of them hand him cash. And my son, I have to tell you, before I even tell you the rest of the story, is not the most charitable person in the world. At least when he was 8, he wasn't. He was the kind of person that if he had a sandwich, he didn't want the rest of it, he'd lick it and throw it in the trash can rather than let his sister or brother have it. So he gets his, the party is over, he's counting his money, he gets up to $300. And he turns to me and he says, Dad, I want to give 150 to the poor, as if I have some direct conduit to the poor that I can get out of the window or something. And I said, I was very impressed. I said, Ryan, that's very generous of you. Why are you giving away this money? He says, I feel rich. And that, I think, cuts it. If a company feels rich, if stockholders feel rich, they're much more inclined to say, okay, give away 10 million, give away 100 million, give away 50 million. So if you're doing well, you can afford to be socially conscious. If you're not doing well, you can't do it. So let's not make this a series of false choices. You have to be a healthy company that delivers value to be able to do all the other neat stuff you'd like companies to do. Okay? And that's my point. It's not that I don't care about customers, I don't care about employees, I don't care about society. Of course, they're going to be, I'm going to care about them in the frame that I'm a business. I still have a commercial objective. So with that setup, let me start with this question, why traditional corporate finance is so focused on maximizing stock prices. Here's one reason. Stock prices are observable. So when you take an action, I can see exactly what the effect of that action is on the stock price. Like what? If you announce an acquisition, I can see what the stock price does on the acquisition. For better or worse, I'm getting an immediate feedback from the market saying, I liked what you did or I did not like what you did. There isn't another measure that you can find where you get instantaneous feedback. Accounting earnings, you might have to wait a quarter, but on an acquisition, you might have to wait years before you get feedback on was that a good acquisition. Market share, who knows when that will actually reflect the fact that you bought another piece of the business. But market prices, you get immediate feedback. That's something you're going to see through the semester. As your company acts, take a look at what the market thinks about it. Because even if you think the market is stupid and it's irrational, there is always information in what the market does. Now, that information might be bad or good, but you can never ignore what markets do, and it's instantaneous. Second, there is a subset of finance which is built on the premise that investors are rational. I'll come back and deal with it because I have mixed feelings about it. I've seen too much craziness around me in markets to make that judgment easily. But if you assume that craziness averages out, that's basically all you need. You don't need rational people. You could have 10 rational people in a market, but as long as everybody else is crazy but in different directions, you'd still get a rational market. Because if investors are rational, then it turns out that the market price is a very good proxy for the value of the equity in your company. It's a big if, but that's the second reason. And the third is, much of finance is academic, and academics love nice, elegant stuff. And market price maximization gives rise to some really great-looking theory. That's not a great sales pitch for me, but you can never underestimate how much that plays a role in why people are attached to what they are. So for better or worse, if you look at most corporate finance research and most corporate finance consulting firms, their focus is, let's go out and maximize stock price. So here's what I'd like to start with. I want to start off by asking the question, what do I have to assume about the world for maximizing stock prices to be the only objective I need for a company? See what I'm trying to figure out? What are the assumptions I need to make if I want to turn CEOs of companies loose with a singular objective? Just go out and increase the stock price. Sounds like a dangerous objective. It is. But the world that I'm going to call it the utopian world from which corporate finance is born. And by calling it the utopian world, I'm already telling you a little bit about what I think about the assumptions I'm just going to list out, right? What's the essence of utopia? It doesn't exist. So it's almost an idealistic word. So as I list out each assumption, you're probably going to say, I don't believe that. You know what? I don't believe it either. But let's list it out because it's going to give us the limiting case. So I'm going to list the assumptions I'm going to make that I need to make for maximizing stock price to be a safe objective by talking about 4 linkages. Here's the first one. In publicly traded companies, stockholders don't make decisions because there are too many of them. They hire managers to make decisions for them. I'm going to assume that stockholders have complete power over managers. How? Through the annual meeting and through the board of directors, they have complete power. And managers are so terrified of what stockholders will do to them, they go out and maximize stock prices. I told you it was an unrealistic world. But in this world, stockholders have complete power over managers. That's the first assumption. Second, I'm going to assume that when banks and bondholders, so basically I lump them together as people lending money to the firm, lend money, even if they don't protect themselves, they leave loopholes the size of a Mack truck, you don't take advantage of it. Why? Because you're worried about reputation effects, that you have to go back to that market to borrow more money. Whatever the reason, you're protected. So I'm assuming lenders lend money, and even if they're not protected, they don't get ripped off. Third, in this world, I'm going to assume that managers reveal information about the company to financial markets honestly and on time. I'm being unrealistic, might as well go the distance, right? So this is a world where managers never lie. Not only do they never lie, they blurt the truth out as soon as it happens. It's like that, remember Jim Carrey movie? Liar, liar. Every manager has that disease. So in this world, bad things happen to the company. The managers run to the market and reveal that bad thing. So I'll give you an example. I'm an Apple user. I've been an Apple user since 1981. And for a long time, Apple did not come out with a laptop. It took them a long time to finally, and I think it was 1989. They came out. It was only loosely called a laptop. It's like a 25-pound monster that burnt your lap. So it comes out, Apple PowerBook. We're all excited. Finally, Apple users have their own laptop. It had one small problem. It sometimes caught fire. The batteries they were using from Sony heated up and went. This is not exactly a feature you go looking for in a laptop, right? Spontaneous combustion, not there, not there, not. Oh, that one has it. It could make your next presentation incredibly memorable, but your next plane trip could be a disaster. So what would Apple do in the world that I just described? They'd run out to markets and say, our laptops are hot. That should give you some insight into how companies lie. I have 4 kids. The lies you get are errors of omission rather than errors of commission. Things you forget to mention rather than things you actually mention. Because when I say our laptops are hot, what do you think? You think I'm selling a lot. You don't think of laptops are hot as laptops going up in flames, right? So let me rephrase it. In the world that I described, Apple goes, our laptops are going up in flames, so we wanted to let you know right away. Or to bring it to a more updated example, remember when IMAP first came out? You'd enter a destination, which is supposed to be 2 miles away, and 3,255 miles later you're saying, where the heck am I? Because it was doing, I mean, there was actually a story that I read in Yahoo. Yahoo is known for these kinds of stories. I think these are the only kinds of stories that show up in Yahoo. About some person who entered a Dunkin' Donut in town, and 3,157 miles later was complaining she hadn't found the Dunkin' Donuts yet. I don't know whether to feel sorry for her or say, this is exactly what's wrong with the human species. Maybe you should not ever get a map. Okay? But in this world, managers tell the truth and they tell it right away. And how do markets respond? Rationally and coolly. You know what a trading room would look like in this world? It'd be full of polite intellectuals. Isn't that a pretty fair description of a trading room? Polite intellectuals? Not. But no, in this world, I can assume what I want. And finally, in this world, there are no social costs. What are social costs? Sorry, what? Something that hurts others. But that's a required condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. So it's something that hurts others as a result of your business, but that I cannot trace and charge back to you. The minute I can trace it and charge it back to you, it becomes an economic cost. I'll give you an example. Let's assume that you create health costs, but I can trace out what the health costs are, and I can charge you for that cost. Then it's no longer a social cost. The minute you can attach a number and put it back to the company, then it becomes an economic cost. And you might stop doing that when I do that, because you say, that's $3 billion, I can't carry it. But social costs not only require a cost to be created for society, but that you cannot trace and charge it back to the company. That's why not all pollution costs are social costs. Because right now you have trading of, you've heard of trading pollution credits, that if you're a company that creates a lot of pollution, you can pay a price and continue to create that pollution. The minute you do that, the social cost becomes an economic cost. Now, of course, when I say social costs, your mind flashes to tobacco companies, or, I mean, you know the companies, the U.S. companies that create social costs. And if you worked at a company and say, my company never created social costs, dispense with that delusion. All businesses create social costs. I talked about the hot dog stand outside. That guy creates a social cost. You know what it is? Every morning when I come down that sidewalk, he's right in the middle of the sidewalk. So I have to walk 3 steps to the left and walk around him, right? That's like 8 extra steps for me. But think of multiplying that by the thousands of people who walk down that sidewalk. That is a social cost. Businesses, almost by definition, create social costs. Or I'll give you another example. I live in part of suburban New Jersey. In suburban New Jersey seems to be a magnet for pharmaceutical companies wanting to put their headquarters right in the middle of, I don't know what that inclination is. But I live in a town where Sharing Plow decided to put a headquarters right in the corner where I used to drive my daughter to drop her off at school before I came and caught the train. So that drive used to take 4 minutes until Sharing Plow opens a headquarters building with a traffic light. And every day, the 4-minute commute became a 10-minute commute. So at the end of the month, I actually took the 6 minutes a day I was spending extra, multiplied by the 22 days. I was fair. I didn't multiply by 30 because the weekends I wasn't doing it. I said 22 times 6 is 132 minutes. This is how much I charge per minute. And in the interest of making this an economic cost, could you pay me? They haven't paid me yet. That's a social cost. But in the world that I described, there are no social costs. Now let me explain why I'm making these assumptions. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to make the world safe for maximizing stock prices, right? I'm trying to take away all the bad ways in which you could increase your stock price. Like what? Like stealing from the bank, expropriating from your lenders, lying to financial markets, creating huge social costs. Those are all ways in which you can increase your stock price if I didn't make those assumptions. So it's a utopian world, but in this world, if you go out and, the only way you can maximize stock prices in this world? It's the old-fashioned way. You've got to go out, take good investments, fund them well, produce a good product, sell it, people have to buy. It takes so much work, though. You're going to be looking for shortcuts, but in this world, there are no shortcuts. So this is the world from which corporate finance is born. Let's talk about what can go wrong. In fact, the way I should phrase this is what can't go wrong, because everything that can go wrong will go wrong, sooner or later. So let's take each linkage. Managers, what did I assume? That stockholders have complete power over managers, right? What universe is that? I mean, how much power do stockholders actually have? If you're a stockholder in a company, ask yourself how much power you have over the manager of the company. I'm a stockholder in Apple. I'm thinking of calling Bob Iger as soon as this class is over and asking him a little bit about his stock buyback policy. I don't think he's going to take my call. Collectively, stockholders don't have that much power. Remember the two mechanisms I talked about, the annual meeting and the board of directors? They're both flawed mechanisms because it's very difficult to exercise power over managers. So I'll give you the examples of how little power stockholders have. But if stockholders have very little power over managers, you know what managers are going to do? They're going to put their interests over stockholder interests. Not because they're bad people, but that's what human beings do. They put self-interest over other people's interests, and that's going to happen. What did I assume about lenders? Lenders lend money to the company and they don't protect themselves, right? In the utopian world, nothing bad happens to them. In the world that I'm going to describe, which is the real world, you lend money to a company. I don't care who the company is. It could be ExxonMobil. It could be the largest, most stable company in the world. You're still asking for trouble if you don't protect yourself, because sooner or later you are going to get exploited. Third, what I assume about managers, they reveal information to financial markets honestly and on time. They sometimes lie. Not as often as the anecdotal evidence would suggest to you, but most of the time the sin that managers commit is not lying but holding back the truth, right? It's not technically illegal if little things are happening and you're not letting the world know right away. It's human nature. And the trading room that I described full of polite intellectuals replaced with actual traders. Polite and intellectual would be the two words that would not come to mind if you're looking at a trading room. Markets are often irrational. They act on impulse. They do things that they should not be doing. And finally, as I said, social costs are part of the fabric of business. You cannot avoid them. You can talk about them, but they're there. In this world, if I ask people to maximize stock prices, I'm asking for trouble. Every big fiasco you hear about, now accounting, is really because something in the system, some friction in the system, allowed people to go out and increase stock prices by doing something they should not be doing. So I'm going to take each of these linkages and spend some time on them. Let me start with the first one. In the utopian world, I assume that stockholders have significant power over managers, and they exercise that power at the annual meeting, which obviously, because it's annual, happens only once a year, but you vote on the people who will sit on the board. And the board of directors then does your bidding as stockholders. So in the utopian world, the directors actually work for the stockholders, keeping an eye on managers. In practice, that's not the way it is. In fact, let's take each of those mechanisms. Let's start with the annual meeting. How many of you own shares in a publicly traded company? Anybody here? Okay, so it looks like about 100 people. How many of you have gone to an annual meeting? It's not bad, a couple of people. And in fact, for most of us, it makes no economic sense to go to an annual meeting. I own shares in Coca-Cola. I'm not going to an annual meeting. You know why? Because what would that involve? Booking a flight to Atlanta. This is what it costs, $500 round trip. Staying in downtown Atlanta, that's costly beyond just the economics of it. Paying for a hotel room for that privilege of staying downtown Atlanta. You add this all up, that's $1,000. There goes my profit for the year, right? So for most of us, it makes no economic sense to go to an annual meeting. So until recently, what did you get about 6 weeks before the meeting that allowed you to be at the meeting in absentia? What do you get as stockholders? You get a proxy. It used to be a big fat envelope. And when I got it, it was going in one of two places. If I was feeling socially conscious, it went into recycling. If I was feeling lazy, it went into trash. The notion of opening that and actually reading all that stuff didn't even cross my mind. And I'm not alone. You know that about 50 to 60% of all proxies never get returned? Let me ask you a question. When I throw that Coca-Cola proxy into the trash can, that's 1,000 shares, 1,000 votes I have, right? So when I throw it into the trash can, what should happen to those 1,000 votes? They should go into the trash can with it, right? But in most companies, guess what happens to all those proxy votes that don't get returned? They go to the incumbent managers. It's actually counted as a vote for incumbent managers. I'll give you the analogy here. It's like having an election where the incumbent gets the votes of anybody who doesn't show up to vote. Do you think anybody in the U.S. would get voted out of office? I think our overall turnout is less than 50%. You wouldn't even have to vote for yourself. You've already gotten re-elected because 50.5% didn't show up. There it is, starts off. You know, when you start off on CNN that day and you watch the news, 50.5% for the incumbent. No votes have been counted, but we counted anybody who didn't show up to vote. It's a system tilted in favor of incumbents. It is very, very difficult to get to 51% against the managers at an incumbent meeting, an annual meeting. So the next time you read the report of an annual meeting for a company, and they say, well, 20% voted against the management, doesn't sound impressive because you're saying 80% voted for. 20% might be half the people who were there actually voted against management. Might be a good place to talk a little bit about Disney. Disney actually at the last annual meeting, actually the 2013 annual meeting, Bob Iger had consolidated his CEO and chairman positions. We'll come and talk about it. He was both chairman of the board and CEO. He decided to do that in 2012. And there was a proposal at the meeting to force him to not do that. I'll tell you the vote percentage, and then you can tell me what you think about stockholders and what they thought about this proposal. 35.3% of the shareholders voted no, that he should not be both. And of course, the way the press read it, that meant 64.7% voted yes. You know, that probably meant that everybody who voted no, but the system is so tilted that you could not get to 50% plus. It is very difficult to get things done at annual meetings because, partly because you're a small stockholder and partly because getting that momentum to get to 51% is so difficult. You're saying that's because you're a small stockholder. What about the Fidelities and the State Streets and the BlackRocks of the world? They're big stockholders, right? They should be able to throw their weight around. But let me show you something that I think is revealing about how institutional investors behave. This is a percentage of votes for incumbent managers, okay, that institutions do. And so basically you can think of two sides. There are the resolutions promoted by the incumbent managers and resolutions coming from shareholders often counter to incumbent managers. This looks at the percentage of the time institutional investors vote with incumbent managers and the percentage of the time they vote with shareholders. Some of these shareholder proposals might be crazy, eccentric, and obviously want to, but look at the difference. You know what this tells me? Most of the time institutional investors are going to go along with incumbent managers, and if they really, really don't like the way a company is run, what do most institutional investors do? They sell and move on. They vote with their feet, and I don't blame them. If you're Fidelity Magellan, you don't have the resources to fight incumbent managers on 150 or 200 companies. So in most companies at the annual meeting, don't expect institutional investors to rally to your side even if you're on the right side of an argument. which I think they were when they talked about chairman and CEO should be separated. Institutional investors said, no, it's too much. I don't want to fight that fight. Some of this may be due to conflicts of interest institutional investors have. So if you're Fidelity, you might be managing the pension fund for the company while being an investor in the company. I'm not suggesting that that tilts the scale, but that's a factor to keep in mind as well. So the annual meeting is not a very effective mechanism for you as stockholders to exercise power over me. So you're saying, what about the board of directors? Well, what about the board of directors? Let me state some facts about the board of directors. First is directors at companies are well paid. It goes without saying, but might as well say it. In 2010, the median board member was paid $212,000 to be a director. And that's just the board pay. They get pensions and all. If you add all that stuff, you're talking about $350,000 or $400,000 for being a board member. That number is probably up about 10 or 15% since. So they get another $150,000 in non-compensation benefits. They don't spend that much time being directors. So think like a director. You're being paid what? About $350,000 to $400,000. You're working on average about 228 hours a year. That counts meeting hours. It counts pre-meeting hours, post-meeting cocktail parties, whatever. It counts everything you do as a director. And that's actually up about 30% from what it was in 2007. You're saying this is good. But here's the problem. Much of that extra time directors are spending now is in getting legal protection against being sued. So the lawyers are in there. God help us. Directors are well paid. They don't have much time to spend as directors. The hours they spend at meetings are not exactly productive. They all show up, from different parts of the world. They all know each other. Half the meeting, they're chatting about other stuff. Last moment, they said, we should look at the numbers. Oh, okay, looked at the numbers. Let's move on. Okay? And they have dual loyalties or multiple loyalties because many of them are directors of 5, 6, or 7 companies at the same time. In other words, board of directors might not be equipped to ask the questions of managers. And here are the things that make it even more troublesome. There are still many companies where the CEO gets to pick who sits on the board. So let's play a little game. You're the CEO of a company. You're trying to find people to sit on your board. You have 2 choices. You can go find the dozen most informed, intelligent people you can who will ask you tough questions and keep you on your toes. That's option 1. The second option is you walk over to your country club into the bar area and you look for the dozen most sloshed people you can. So would you like to be on my board? How about you? And ask yourself which would make your life easier. It's a no-brainer. If you get to pick directors, you're not going to ask people. You're not going to pick people who ask you tough questions. You want people who want martinis. Have a martini. We lost $3 billion in China. Forgotten it already. Have another one. By the time the meeting's over, everybody's forgotten everything. In U.S. companies, though, increasingly, and we'll talk about some good trends, there are companies we have nominating committees where a portion of the board decides. So the CEO is not supposed to have a say. Supposed to is the key word. The reality is the nominating committee is not exactly going to pick people at random. It's going to check out with the CEO. So even in today's setup, CEOs have a big say in who sits on the board. Most companies, directors don't have big, they're not stockholders. How much do they make as directors? $350,000, $400,000. So in many companies, you have this token requirement. You have to own 100 shares. 1 in 5 directors doesn't even meet that token requirement. But you own 100 shares, which are worth $1,000, and you get $300,000 as a director. It's very difficult for you to think like a stockholder. And finally, there are an extraordinary number of cases where you look at the board of your company and there are CEOs of other companies, active CEOs. I've never understood how you have the time to be the CEO of your own company and sit on the board of another company. And the worst cases are when CEOs sit on each other's boards. There are about 50 companies where CEOs sit on each other's boards. Can you imagine how that first meeting goes? You're the CEO of a company and you're sitting on my board. I brought up a number that you think is very troublesome. You're about to ask a tough question about that number when you remember your meeting is 2 weeks from now and I'll be at your meeting. So what? That number looks really good. Let's move on, right? It's not exactly a recipe for the kind of questioning you need. I'm not saying that you need to be confrontational, but somebody has to ask questions about why you're doing what you're doing. And finally, once the meeting starts, there is that book that I absolutely hate. Have you ever had this in a meeting where somebody is one of those fanatics about Robert's Rules of Order, that was out of order. Now don't even bring that up. If you have Robert's Rules of Order, you can essentially dominate a meeting once you've set the agenda. Everything is off agenda. You can't bring that up. Second, I don't even know what the process is, but clearly there's a reason it was instituted, and there are good reasons and bad consequences. So the CEO runs a meeting essentially with Robert's Rules of Order. They can keep the meeting focused on what they want it focused on, and they can keep discussions of things they don't want off the table. Second, it's human nature once you're in there with 11 other people. It's much easier being part of the group than to be the contrarian, right? And here's, I think, the third factor, and this is something that I think we all need to think about improving in terms of corporate governance. Much of the work that has been done about improving corporate governance has focused on appearance. You know what I mean by appearance? Is the board small? Is it independent? How many years of directed? And those are all good questions to ask. But here's the one thing that I think corporate governance, the people who want to reform corporate governance have missed, is there's an incredible amount of research in psychology that when you get into a room with 12 other people, you're looking for an authority figure. And whether you like it or not, the CEO knows more about the company than you do. So after a while, you start to say, well, so even if you are independent, after a while it becomes very difficult for you to question somebody. Can you imagine being on Uber's board and Travis Kalanick gets up? Or worse, can you imagine being on Tesla's board and saying, Elon, you're wrong? It's going to be tough to do because, in a sense, you start to say you know more about the company than you do. So when you say something, I don't think I can ask you that question. Part of you says, no, I'll be independent. But put yourself in groups where somebody clearly is intelligent, you respect what they do, and they say something, and you say, well, you do know more, so I'm going to say okay to that. So all of those things factor in, making boards a lot less effective than they should be. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use Disney as my lab experiment. I'm going to go all the way back to 1997. You think, why go back to 97? I'll show you the board today. But I'm going to go back to 97 because I'm convinced that this is the worst board created at a large publicly traded company ever. So before I dig any deeper, who is the CEO of I almost gave away the answer there, of Disney in 1997? A guy called Michael Eisner, a guy whose ego was so large that he could be in a large room by himself and it would be crowded. Right? So this is the board of directors he put together in 97. And he put it together. These are people that he came up with the names. Here's the first problem with the board. There are, I think, 17 members on the board. You think, so what? Try this experiment. After class today, get together as a group of 17 and try to decide where to go for lunch. I'll safely predict that you will not eat lunch today. Nothing ever gets decided in a group of 17. You get around the table, it's already 3 hours, meeting's over. So too big, strike one. Strike two. 8 of these 17 members are insiders. They either work at Disney or used to work at Disney. You see why this is an issue? What's the job of the board? To look over top management to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And half the board, roughly speaking, is top management. So strike two. Who's the chairman of the board? Oh, Michael Eisner. So let me get this straight. You're chairing the board that oversees what you do, and you're going to tell me when you're doing something badly. There's no defense for being chair and CEO at the same time. There's absolutely none. You saw this play out at JP Morgan with Jamie Dimon last year. And people said, but he's such a good guy, it's got nothing to do with how good a guy you are and how smart you are. It violates a conflict of interest. You want a board to ask tough questions of the CEO. That's not going to happen if the CEO is the chair of the board. So strike three. If this were baseball, you just struck out. This is such a bad board. I'm going to give you a fourth strike. Let's look at the outsiders. Maybe they're so smart and independent. They make up for all the rest of the stuff. So let's start at the top. Rebecca F. Bowers. You think, who the heck is she? She's the principal of an elementary school in Los Angeles. Nothing wrong with that. Disney is a kid-oriented company. Good to have somebody who's around kids all the time. She happened to be, and this is pure coincidence, I think, the headmistress of the school that Eisner's kids went to. I'm sure it's pure coincidence. Okay. That's Miss Bowers. Let's keep going. There's George Mitchell. He's checking for steroids on the board. That's like an inside joke if you're a Major League Baseball fan. Right? Oh, Father Leo Donovan. Any Georgetown grads here? This is good. Some religious influence on this Heathen board, right? Keep them on the straight and the narrow. But this again might be pure coincidence, but Michael Eisner's son went to Georgetown. Michael Eisner served on Georgetown's board. Michael Eisner had made a substantial contribution to Georgetown. I'm not suggesting there's any quid pro quo, but Father Leo does not quite pass the smell test, right? Let's keep going. Sidney Poitier, I'll come back to him, great actor. But here's my least favorite example of a board member. Irwin E. Russell, attorney at law. See, what do you have against lawyers? Actually, a lot of things, but this is not the forum to talk about that. But this guy happened to be Michael Eisner's personal attorney. How the heck do you get away with this? You got your lawyer on the board and you're telling me he's going to be independent? It's nice to have your lawyer in the room all the time, saying, don't answer that question, Mike. Take the fifth on that one, Mike. But don't tell me he's going to be an independent third party. And let's circle back to Sidney Poitier, great actor, right? In fact, in 1997, he made the list of top 10 directors. This is good, somebody doing their job. Top 10 directors who missed the most meetings. He missed 75% of the meetings in the previous 3 years. So guess who's coming to dinner is, guess who's not coming to the meeting this time? And to cap it all off, Sidney Poitier was the head of the compensation committee that decided how much they pay Michael Eisner. This was such an awful board. That all you had to do is take one look at it and say, this board is a rubber stamp board for an imperial CEO. You know what an imperial CEO is? It's like Caesar. You make decisions and the board says, okay, great decision. And during the 1990s, Disney did some really strange things. They did get this article in the Wall Street Journal. How could the board let Michael Eisner do this really crazy thing? And the answer is right there in front of them. Take a look at who's on the board. I'll give you a couple of examples of strange things that Disney did. Give you some history. Michael Eisner came from Paramount to 1986. And when he came in 86 to Disney, Disney was actually a company that wasn't doing very well. So Paramount was doing well, Disney wasn't doing well. So they had to give him all these inducements to come. And he came. And when he came, he brought his personal assistant with him. You say, personal assistant, what's the big deal? In the days before smartphones and Google Calendar, your personal assistant basically ran your life in Hollywood. So he knew where you lived, what your wife's name was, what her birthday. I mean, basically. He said, I can't live without my personal assistant. He has to come with me. And his name was Jeffrey Katzenberg. And Jeffrey did not want to leave Paramount. He said, who wants to go to that loser company? And Eisner said, if you come with me, I'll make you the head of a division. And knowing how Eisner's mind worked, he picked the division most likely to go under. He said, why don't you become head of animated movies at Disney? They haven't put a hit out in 15 years. Fox and the Hound. Expecting him to. And to sweeten the pot even further, he said, if you become the head of the division, you are entitled, I'll give you 5% of all the profits you make on the movies you make while you're ahead. The rest, as they say, is cultural history. Katzenberg came with Eisner, and he created the rebirth, the Lion King. I mean, we all grew up with, or at least some of you grew up with Lion King, Little Mermaid, so hit. By 1992, Katzenberg's division is accounting for 30% of the profits at Disney. This is good, right? You reward people who do the right thing. You know how Eisner's mind went? This guy is becoming a threat. We have to get rid of him. So he goes to the board and says, get rid of him for me. And the board says, of course, Mike, how quickly do we have to do it? And then one of the board members says, but you promised this guy 5% of all the profits on Little Mermaid in perpetuity. Can you imagine? You'd never have to work a day in your life. Eh? Ariel and the Sea Witch will save you for the rest of eternity, right? And here's what Eisner says, let's not pay him. So, why? It's a contract. So I don't like the guy. Seriously, he did that. And what do you think Katzenberg did? He sued. The case didn't last very long. The judge said, Mr. Eisner, is this the contract? 5% of the... He said, why aren't you paying him? You don't like him. I'm sorry, that's not the basis for violating a contract. Pay him $150 million. That's what they had to pay him, $150 million. which you used as seed money for what? DreamWorks. The next time you watch a Shrek movie, here's what I want you to watch for. Watch all the digs they get in on Disney movies. Like in Shrek, Snow White and the Seven Perverts, not Seven Dwarfs, right? Sleeping Beauty has an addiction problem. She just takes too many sleeping pills. I mean, that's what. So, and it goes back very deep, because Katzenberg doesn't like Disney, and he tries to get it through those movies. So when you look at Disney's history, and there's actually a great book called Disney War. It's by James Stewart. It's a great read. It's a fun read. It shows you how dysfunctional the top management at a big company can get, how petty they can be. But you step back and say, how did the board of directors allow this pettiness to get out of control like it did? The answer is right there. The first place to start your corporate finance exercise is take a look at the board of directors for your company. So start with who's on the board. To open up the annual report, and if you can, start digging through, are they insiders or outsiders? So start with that assessment. And in fact, in 97, CalPERS came up with this 3-question test for is the board independent. So are the majority of directors outside directors? Is the chairman independent of the company? Are the compensation and audit committees entirely composed of outsiders? Disney was the only company that failed all 3 tests in 97. Let me load up the dice. In 1997, Business Week ranked boards. Business Week loves lists. They ranked boards. Worst boards in the US, guess who's on top? Disney. Right behind them is AT&T, and AT&T is saying, we'll beat you next time. Just give us a chance, right? So this is a list of dysfunctional companies trying to do dysfunctional things because they just want to be on the list. So that 97 board basically gives you a microcosm of how companies go off the tracks. So when you get a chance, here's what I'd like you to do. Start with your company, look up the board. For that, you have to pick a company. That's why I say pick a company, and then you can come back and redo it with a different company if you want. Take a look at the board. See what you can find about the board members. Google search is so incredibly powerful. Just type in the name of director, see what pops up. Just hope his name is not James Smith, because then you have a problem. Okay, so basically, you've got to refine the search. See what you can find out about the board. Then see if there are any outside entities that are ranking your company based on the quality of the board. I always have mixed feelings about these, because many companies now have rankings that come out of this company ranks high in corporate governance. Mixed feelings because many of these rankings are based on check boxes. You meet all the check boxes, you sound good. But at least see if you can get a score for, and I'll give you a couple of, Yahoo Finance used to report the score for companies. Now they have hidden it because they're not allowed to. But I'll send you a couple of links where you can see if your company has some measure from the outside. And third, and this is what I want you to focus on, it's easy to build an independent board. It's difficult to create an effective board. And the line I draw, an effective board is a board that actually stops managers from doing something, that actually gets in the way of CEO saying, no, that doesn't make sense. So what I'd like you to look for with your companies, is there any evidence that the board of directors has done something that the CEO does not want them to do? Because that is the ultimate test of, do you have an effective board? And as I said, the minute the board becomes, annual meetings and board of directors are not that effective. Stockholders have little power over managers. Managers start putting their interests over stockholder interests. So I'd like to list out some examples of managerial interest overwhelming stockholder interest. The first is green mail. You know when this is going to come to the surface? Is put yourself in the shoes of the manager of a company. Okay? Now I'm going to create a scenario where you've now been targeted in a hostile acquisition. See why I made it hostile? What's the essence of a hostile acquisition? What am I telling you as managers? If this acquisition goes through, you're not going to have a job. This kind of focuses the mind, right? Because now you're saying, what do I do? And I'll give you the 2 choices. You can do the right thing from a corporate finance perspective, which is to do the best thing for your stockholders, which might be to sell the company to the guy if he's overpaying, but then you lose your job. And the other thing you can say, well, so who cares about the stockholders? I want my job, and you can try to fight the hostile takeover. You Again, this isn't a question of good people and bad people. Let's face it, if you were in that position, you will find a way to convince yourself that you're doing the right thing while you're fighting off the takeover, saying it's all for them, when in fact it's all for you. And then you start coming up with ways to fight off the takeover. Green mail is one of them. So what do you do in green mail that stops the hostile takeover? It's just like blackmail, just a lot more money, and it's legal. So let's play a game. I am the hostile acquirer. Give me a name, give me a face, give me a persona. Carl Icahn. You're the manager of the target firm. So how does this work? When I get up to a threshold, I have to announce to the world that I plan to take you over, right? 5%, I have to let the SEC know. So I've gotten to the threshold. I call a big press conference. The bigger the better, because I want the whole world to know that I plan to take you over. And I'm very specific about why. This is the worst managed company in the face of the earth, and right after I take them over, I'm going to fire every top manager. You're a top manager. Okay? So you know what you do in Greenmail? You come to me, Carl Icahn, with an offer I can't refuse. Shades of the Godfather. So let's say I paid $100 million to get my 5%. You offer me $250 million to go away. And to keep this process airtight, you also asked me to sign what's called a standstill agreement, which means I will not buy shares in your company for the next 3 years. Make sure I sign that agreement, because if you just pay me $250 million and you forget that agreement, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the $250 million, buy another 5%. I know you're a weak spot now, so basically you're going to keep paying me until you run out of cash. So if you do your job right, I'm going to sign a standstill agreement and I'm going to go away. So what have you accomplished? You made the hostile acquirer go away. Congratulations, you've saved your job by paying an extra $150 million. Nothing wrong with that if you came with the $250 million by selling your house, your portfolio, but that's not the way you raised it. You used my money, stockholder money, to make sure I did not get a price higher than the price today. How do you get away with this? How do you explain this to stockholders? How do you tell them it was all for you? There is no conceivable defense for Greenmail. But you know why it happens? If you're not afraid of what stockholders can do to you, you are going to pay Greenmail. You're going to have a board of directors that protects you, and you're going to move on. So that's Greenmail. Second is golden parachutes. You know what golden parachutes are? What are you worried about? You're not worried about the company. You're worried about you. You're worried about your future. You're worried about your pocketbook. You know I'm going to try to take you over. And you know you're going to lose your job. So as soon as you hear that I'm trying to take you over, you run to your lawyers. So this is after you've heard the news. And you add a clause to your compensation contract saying, if we get taken over, I get paid $50 million, $25 million, $18 million. That's the golden part of the parachute. Everybody below you gets lead parachutes, or that's their problem. But you put in clauses. And see what bothers me now? If you negotiated this when you joined the company 2 years ago, I don't have a problem with this. But you put it in after the fact because you want to make sure you extract your surplus if a takeover happens. It just makes acquisitions less likely. It makes you better off. It makes me worse off as a stockholder. So that's golden parachutes. What about poison pills? Notice the terminology in M&A is this weird mix of medieval times and James Bond movies. You know, if you hang around M&A guys, after a while you're confused. Are you on a horse charging something? Are you on it with a... So it's almost like... But there's a lot of very violent stuff going on here, right? You know what a poison pill is? You put something in your company that makes it unpalatable to the acquirer. I'll give you a simplistic example. For a long time, the FCC had these rules on not owning two TV stations in the same media market. So for a long time, this was a classic way to fight off a hostile acquisition if another media company tried to take you over. You'd find which cities they had TV stations in. You'd go buy a TV station in that city, overpay massively. Then you'd go to the FCC and say, you can't let this happen. It's illegal. And you'd put in some kind of clause that made it impossible for them to sell that TV station. Here's the second example. It's called a flip-over rights plan. You know how a rights plan works? Stock is 100. I give you the right to buy at 10. It's actually a very effective way of raising capital. European companies do it all the time. But in a flip-over rights plan, here's what I do. Stock's trading at 100. I give you the right to buy an additional share at 1,000. You say, why do I want that right? As long as I run the company. If Carl Icahn takes over the company, the rights price drops to 10. Do you see what I've done? I've created a security that is worthless if I run the company, but the minute a hostile acquirer wins, it blows up in their face. I'll leave you with an analogy to bring home this poison pill because it's actually a kind of tough concept to get around. And it came to me when I was, I have 4 kids. My third one is my only daughter. And this was when she was about 6 years old. I take her to breakfast with her 2 older brothers. So we get to the breakfast place. They all sit on one side of the table. Nobody wants to sit with Dad. I sit on the other. She's in the middle. Her 2 older brothers are on either side of her. They all order eggs with fries. Waitress comes and puts eggs with fries, eggs with fries, eggs with fries. The minute the plate lands in front of my daughter, she spits all over her fries. Disgusting, right? But if you have siblings, you know exactly what she was doing. You have 2 older brothers on either side. If you have a plate of fries in front of you, you know exactly where those fries are going, right? They're not going to... She was introducing a poison pill. See why it's a poison pill? You spit on your fries, you're completely okay with it. Everybody's saying, I'm not touching those fries. So the next time you hear the words poison pill, think, spit on my fries. You pretty much get the same idea, right? But if you can pick a company and start to collect the data, that'll be great, because next week we're going to start to dig a little deeper into this. Take care. Yep.